these answers are always so kind of, they sound so kind of glib and so corny, but unfortunately I don't have any others for you today, and that is that, there's just a way things ought to be, and they're either going to start to be that way in this country, or things are going to get worse and worse and worse for everybody. And certainly the institution of the criminal justice system in this country, which I've always said in this press campaign for this movie, is one of the great linchpins of civil rights tension in this country, is an institution where everybody's going to walk through the same door, and they're not going to be treated equally, and that in itself is what's going to cause as much as economic insecurities that are generated by, and economic inequalities that are generated by racism in this country, of which affirmative action was designed to address. One of the things I'm so fascinated about people who are trying to deconstruct affirmative action is they think that it was just created out of nowhere for no reason. That affirmative action was just created in order to make some people, some powerful white business interests uncomfortable, and it was just created to kind of agitate them and piss them off, and that there was no racial inequality and economic opportunity that this was designed to resolve. That if government didn't interfere and we all stepped back, that every guy that owned businesses locally that was a white guy was going to immediately get on the phone and try to find out where are all those able-bodied black guys I can hire to put in my, put at the table with me at my corporate, and put on my board. So I always find it a little unnerving when people talk about all of this kind of great society-based, late 20th century progressive legislation that was passed, like it was all done without a very specific redress in mind. And the criminal justice system, a perfect example is you got 65% of all powder cocaine arrests. We've all heard this thing. I remember now this is in vogue in the last 12 months to be talking about this cocaine prosecution inequity. I was reading about this in Harper's. Louis Lapham put this in the Harper's Index 3 years ago. Louis Lapham said in the Harper's Index, I don't know if you ever read Harper's Index, where he says amount of average criminal sentence for possession of 1 ounce powdered cocaine, 18 months. Percentage of those arrested for 1 ounce of possession of powdered cocaine that are white, 65%. Average criminal sentence for those arrested for 1 ounce of crack cocaine, 7 years. Percentage of those arrested for crack cocaine who are black, 80%. And you just say to yourself, there's nothing you can say to me. I don't care what law school you went to. I don't care if you're Judge Edgar the Great, the greatest legal mind in history. There's not a goddamn thing you can say to me that can explain that to me, why that is. There's just no excuse for that. And there's a lot of things in this society that there are no excuse for along those lines. And one of those things that there was no excuse for was that back in 1963, everybody knows that Dela Beckwith shot Evers. Everybody on that jury knew Dela Beckwith shot Evers. Everybody in the whole goddamn state of Mississippi knew that Dela Beckwith shot Evers. And when he'd leave the state and he'd go to Louisiana or he'd go anywhere, what's the first thing he'd do when he met you? He'd tell you that he shot Evers. And so everybody knew he did it. This is not a case in which people sat around going, well, why do we want to open up this case again? How are we going to be able to really conclude? What are we going to be doing to Beckwith? How are we going to really be able to conclude that, Beckwith was the killer? That was never an issue in this case. Never, 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 never. Everybody knows he killed him. So the question was, do we want to make him pay? Do we want to make him accountable? And a lot of people would sit there and go, well, it was so long ago. Well, it was so long ago. And that's easy for you to say if Evers wasn't a potential political icon to your people. Who's to say what Evers could have become if he didn't die just months after the civil rights movement started to really get ahead of steam with the Alabama desegregation in 1962? When Evers came back from Chicago down to Mississippi, there was no national platform for the civil rights movement. This is a guy who was like a lone wolf with a bunch of other guys, who was like a real cadre of people down in Mississippi in '58. Talk about bravery. Civil rights political activism in Mississippi in 1958. Eisenhower was still the president. And you're trying to organize people on civil rights lines in 1958 and 59. This guy had huge balls and was a huge, courageous figure, Evers. Now, 62 comes along and things really start to get going on a national level, and some of the careers of some of the men that were going to become the great deities of the civil rights movement of the 60s start to emerge and start to get built up. Abernathy, King, Young, all these people. And right when it starts to pick up its head of steam in 62 with the desegregation, Evers gets killed. Before he really gets to address anything on a national level and become part of the debate on a national level, he gets killed. And I am of the belief, and this is just my opinion, that if you kill a guy who has the chance to become one of the most formative black political leaders in our country, who's to say what he might have accomplished had he lived, that we all suffer as a result of that. All Americans are diminished by the death of Evers. I just believe that. So when you say to me 30 years later we have a chance to get this guy, and people go, you know, it's like the same thing I always say to somebody about AIDS. People say to me, well, why do you think there's so much focus on AIDS research? Why are we so worried about AIDS? And I go, well, it just depends on where you're at, you know. If AIDS could be transmitted by gripping the handle of a golf club, we'd have a cure to AIDS yesterday. You know, it just depends on whose side you're on and what's concern of yours. And if you're black and living in this country, the fact that you wanted Delia Beckwith to go down for killing Evers, you're goddamn right that was an important thing. And DeLaughter recognized that. Justice is justice, and Delia Beckwith had to be made to pay. And he didn't care what the consequences were, and that's why I think he's not heroic. I mean, Bobby will tell you he doesn't think he's heroic. He's doing his job. It's not unusual that Bob wanted to prosecute Delia Beckwith. It would have been unusual if he didn't.